46 lives extinguished in an instant, as a crippled An-26 plummeted into the residential neighborhood of Al-Sawra. Among those lost in the inferno, the highly influential Major General Bahr Ahmed Bahr. So, why would the High Command entrust their lives to a 40-year-old aircraft, held together by little more than a prayer and the sheer skill of its mechanics? This is the story of how a logistical nightmare at Wadi Seidna Air Base led to an inevitable tragedy. A tragedy whose true causes they tried to bury in the wreckage. A city shrouded in smoke, its main gateway to the world slammed shut. The month is April 2023. A massive conflict erupts in Sudan. Khartoum International Airport, which for decades had welcomed flights from all over the globe, is paralyzed. The military loses access to its runways. The infrastructure is in ruins. The control towers are empty. The radar is silent. Overnight, the country is cut off from its primary logistical hub. All eyes turn north of the capital. There, through a thick veil of dust, the outlines of Wadi Seidna Air Base emerge. The immense burden of supplying a massive army instantly falls upon these old concrete slabs. Wadi Seidna becomes the single, pulsing heart of all aerial logistics. The tempo of flights here smashes all conceivable limits. The air constantly trembles with the roar of turbines. Transport planes land and take off around the clock, like links in an endless conveyor belt. Crews are pushed to the breaking point, and technicians spend their days and nights on the scorching hot concrete. But even metal has its limits. The Sudanese Air Force is facing a systemic supply crisis. There are simply no original spare parts. Global supply chains have been severed, and warehouses are emptying out at an alarming rate. These huge transport planes, hauling tons of critical cargo, demand meticulous care. In peacetime, they would be sent to certified centers for regular overhauls. Now, the mechanics have no such luxury. The engineering service specialists piece together aircraft bit by bit, cannibalizing entire units from donor planes to keep the working fleet in the air. They start up engines knowing full well the equipment is long past its service life. Pilots lift these heavy machines into the blistering African sky, fully aware of the high price of any malfunction. The entire fleet is operating beyond its established limits, and every new day at Wadi Seidna becomes a grim routine of keeping things flying that, by all technical regulations, should have been grounded. The deep twilight of February 25th conceals the true age of this steel-winged veteran. The year is 2025. On the sun-baked concrete of Wadi Seidna, a twin-engine turboprop, an An-26, is preparing for departure. This aircraft remembers a completely different era when aviation relied on analog gauges. The factories had completely ceased mass production of these rugged machines way back in 1986. Journalists from international aviation magazines often refer to these old planes as true flying dinosaurs. Our Sudanese specimen is at least 39 years old. For nearly 4 decades, the metal of its fuselage has relentlessly endured colossal swings in temperature and harsh atmospheric pressure. An aviation technician, carefully inspecting the worn landing gear with a dim flashlight, understands the gravity of the situation perfectly. Finding original spare parts for such an antique is now virtually impossible. The massive machine is held together solely by the incredible skill of its engineers and the endless margin of safety built in by Soviet designers in the middle of the last century. But time waits for no one. The hands on the pilot's watch are relentlessly ticking down the final minutes to takeoff. The flight plan is crystal clear. The plane's course is set due east, towards the Red Sea coast. The final destination is the fortified military airfield in the strategic city of Port Sudan. This relatively safe, rear-echelon logistics hub is in desperate need of a regular supply line. Right now, heavy wooden crates are being slowly rolled up the massive rear ramp and into the cavernous, dark belly of the transport. A critical shipment of army supplies is being urgently loaded to support a distant garrison. The ground crew works in a frantic hurry, their shouts barely audible over the constant whine of the auxiliary power units. Onlookers on the airfield notice with alarm how heavily the old shock absorbers sag under the growing weight of the equipment. Every container is meticulously secured with steel cables. In the dynamic environment of flight, the slightest shift in the center of gravity could instantly lead to a fatal outcome. the huge cargo bay gradually fills, and then it's time for the people. One by one, 17 individuals climb the steep metal ladder. 4 of them make up the incredibly experienced flight crew, on whose shoulders rests the colossal responsibility for the safe operation of this aging flying machine. The other 13 are passengers who will spend long hours in a cramped and deafeningly loud cabin, right in the middle of securely fastened military cargo. In the cockpit, the lead pilot runs a practiced eye over the instrument panel, carefully checking the pressure readings in all the oil systems. The old, worn-out dial indicators tremble slightly with the vibration. On the surface, it's just another routine transport flight, the kind that the besieged Wadi Seidna base sends out by the dozen every single day. However, the official passenger manifest makes this particular departure truly special. Among those now quietly taking their places on the hard seats of the austere cabin is a major state figure. Settling into the dim twilight of the cargo hold is the Supreme Army Commander of Khartoum, the renowned Major General Bahr Ahmed Bahr. A high-ranking officer of his stature always wields immense political influence and possesses strategically vital, secret information about the ongoing conflict. His personal movements are typically planned with an unprecedented level of care, and standard security protocols are amplified many times over. The personal presence of the direct commander of the entire capital region on board such an old transport plane starkly highlights the harsh realities of the current logistical situation. Sudan's high command is simply forced to use whatever aircraft is physically capable of getting into the air at any given moment. A tired mechanic on the ground gives a confident wave with his glowing signal wands. With a strained roar, the first turboprop engine sputters to life, then the second. The enormous metal propeller blades quickly blur into a shimmering, solid disc. The commander requests permission from the tower to taxi for a nighttime departure. The multi-ton machine lurches forward, heavily maneuvering toward its starting position before the runway. The absolute silence on the radio conceals the threat far better than any camouflage. A clear, starry night hangs over the Sudanese air base. It's as if nature itself is deliberately setting the perfect stage. The thermometer is steady at 26 degrees Celsius. For this climate, such conditions are a gift. The night air is dense, dry, and clean. Meteorological radars are quiet. No extreme weather events, no sudden squalls, sandstorms, or thunderstorms are detected anywhere in the vicinity. The sky above is transparent. A light northern wind, blowing at barely 10 or 11 kilometers per hour, gently glides over the concrete, still warm from the hot day, as if a hand is trying to cool the runway before the coming ordeal. The weather is giving the crew a green light. Later, the lead investigator for the accident commission will spend long hours in his office, meticulously studying the weather reports from that fateful evening. His eyes will scan the smooth graphs of pressure and humidity. The conditions were phenomenally good. This means the environment is completely absolved of any responsibility for what happens next. The fatal factor is hiding deep within the preparation process itself. The military airfield at Wadi Seidna is now completely plunged into thick darkness. Takeoff is proceeding under a total blackout. All directional spotlights are off. The tall lighting masts stand completely dark. The colored lights along the edges of the taxiways are extinguished. The wide runway has instantly become a blind ribbon of asphalt. A young soldier from the security battalion stares intently into the pitch-black gloom, his knuckles turning white as he grips the cold stock of his rifle. He can clearly hear the growing roar of the turbines, but he cannot physically see the moving aircraft. Only the blue glint of flames from the exhaust pipes betrays the precise location of the An-26. Radio communication between the control tower and the cockpit is kept to an absolute minimum. Pilots and controllers exchange only rare, clipped phrases. A single careless word on an open radio frequency could instantly reveal the government plane's exact coordinates. Every move the experienced pilots make has long been honed to pure instinct. They are forced to operate almost completely blind, their eyes greedily fixed on the greenish glow of the old phosphorus dials on the worn instrument panel. The limited visibility transforms the huge transport plane into a heavy specter, slowly creeping across the concrete. Time compresses into a tightly wound spring. The duty controller in the glass booth squeezes the microphone's push-to-talk button until his knuckles ache. The second hand on his watch relentlessly counts down the last fleeting moments before takeoff. It seems as though the greatest danger is the impenetrable African night itself. Maybe it's the treacherous darkness, hiding a deep fissure in the old, cracked tarmac. Seasoned journalists would later call this particular night a masterclass in stealth. And yet, a far more treacherous enemy was already close at hand. The captain smoothly and confidently pushes the twin throttle levers forward, engaging full takeoff power. The turbines respond with a high-pitched scream, greedily gulping down the cool night air through their intakes. The massive four-bladed propellers begin to churn, slicing violently through the air, generating immense thrust. A fine tremor immediately runs through the entire length of the long, riveted fuselage. Every person sitting in the cramped, dimly lit cargo bay feels that powerful vibration. The heavy aircraft, packed to the ceiling with military gear and passengers, reluctantly begins its difficult takeoff roll. The rubber tires of the sturdy landing gear swallow the numerous joints in the massive concrete slabs with a rhythmic, hollow thud. The speed builds rapidly with each passing second. 100, 120, 150 kilometers per hour. The dense headwind rushes over the metal surfaces of the wide wings. The unyielding laws of physics obediently go to work, invisibly generating the vital, life-saving force of lift. In the cockpit, the pilot's eyes are glued to the rapidly climbing white needle of the airspeed indicator, waiting for that critical point of no return. The threshold is passed. Aborting the takeoff is no longer an option. The massive winged machine gracefully lifts its nose gear off the ground. All the passengers inside physically feel the growing G-forces pressing them into their seats. The heavy landing gear lifts off the concrete as an invisible timer begins its countdown. The enormous mass of metal, crammed with heavy crates and people, is now suspended between the solid earth and the night sky. A journalist, watching the night's departures from a safe hiding spot beyond the military base's outer perimeter, sees only a dark silhouette blotting out the bright stars. The plane is climbing, but agonizingly slowly. At this moment, the winged machine resembles an overloaded barge fighting with all its might against a powerful river current. The thin air reluctantly supports the old straight wings. This is the start of the most difficult and energy-intensive phase of any flight. The initial climb. Every new 100 meters of altitude is gained with incredible difficulty, demanding maximum output from the worn-out machinery. The altimeter needles in the cramped cockpit barely seem to twitch upward. Aviation safety experts rightly call these brief seconds the most critical of all. And then, the unthinkable happens. The right turboprop engine suddenly lets out a sharp, unnatural bang, sounding eerily like the dry crack of a large-caliber anti-aircraft gun. The tough metal inside the high-speed turbine grinds with a sickening screech. The operating pressure instantly drops to zero. This sudden engine failure has occurred at the worst possible moment, when the solid ground is still terrifyingly close. There is simply no altitude for a safe maneuver. The reserve of kinetic energy is minimal. The thrust is cut exactly in half, but the aircraft's massive takeoff weight remains the same. The experienced captain instinctively grips the yoke, fighting a powerful roll. In the cargo bay, the passengers hold their breath, physically feeling a sharp lurch, a sudden drop beneath them. An eyewitness on the airfield sees a short burst of unnaturally bright orange sparks shoot from the exhaust pipe. It's a catastrophic loss of power at a phase of flight where every fraction of a second is critical. The clock is now ticking in milliseconds, turning the cockpit into the epicenter of a complex mathematical equation. Investigators would later note in their official reports the crew's performance was absolutely flawless. But the harsh rules of aviation are incredibly unforgiving. The procedures dictate their own iron laws. It is now utterly impossible to abort the takeoff. Once a multi-ton machine is fully airborne, there is no way back to the safety of the concrete. You can't brake in midair. There is only one option left. Pull back on the yoke and try to squeeze every last ounce of power from the remaining left engine. The working engine is now roaring at the very limit of its physical capabilities, desperately trying to haul the heavily loaded aircraft upward. The aircraft hangs in the void, clawing at the invisible air currents. the pilots fight a desperate battle against unruly aerodynamics. The sudden, asymmetrical thrust aggressively yaws the transport's nose to the right, demanding colossal effort on the rudder pedals. The severe mechanical failure of a primary system confronts the crew with a stark fact. They are now flying a heavy glider that is rapidly bleeding precious airspeed. Every part of the structure groans under extreme structural stress. The flight engineer frantically flips switches, trying to immediately shut off the main fuel line to the damaged components to prevent a terrifying fire. The passengers hear only the deafening, strained howl of the single working propeller. In this dramatic moment, the invisible line between the safety of the sky and the hardness of the ground becomes frighteningly thin. The heavily loaded plane continues to move forward, purely on the iron will and supreme skill of the people at the controls. No one says a word. Only the fine vibration of the metal floor betrays the machine's intense struggle for stability. The engine gave out before they reached a safe altitude, completely robbing the pilots of the necessary buffer. The aircraft commander makes the only correct decision within these rigid constraints: continue a slow climb, balancing on the razor's edge of a dangerous aerodynamic stall. The machine relentlessly pushes through the dense wall of air, leaving a long, invisible trail behind it. The situation demands absolute concentration from every crew member, as there are no other options left. Ahead lies only the endless dark night and a grueling fight for every meter. The dead engine has suddenly become a giant, invisible air anchor. The heavy transport shudders through its entire massive metal body. Immediately after losing power from the right engine, a merciless physical battle begins between human beings and the unforgiving laws of nature. The engine failure during the most critical phase of takeoff creates a sharp, terrifying asymmetry of thrust. The working left propeller continues to furiously pull the heavy fuselage forward, while the right engine becomes an immovable obstacle. Imagine you're rowing a boat with all your might, but only with the right oar, while the left one is suddenly and hopelessly tangled in thick underwater weeds. The propeller of the failed engine instantly creates colossal aerodynamic drag. The massive metal blades were never properly feathered by the crew. They become a giant air brake, turned flat against the oncoming wind. Instead of slicing through the dense air, the wide metal blades are now just slamming into it, like hitting a concrete wall. A seasoned investigator would later study the dry figures of the flight telemetry in a quiet office in the capital. The stopwatch in his head mercilessly counts down the fleeting seconds. A critical thrust deficit emerges. The machine needs to pull its multi-ton load forward, overcoming the powerful pull of gravity, but it no longer has the strength. The heavy aircraft desperately needs a perfect balance, but fundamental physics is now working against the exhausted crew. The captain and his first officer are pressing the rudder pedals with all their strength, desperately trying to keep the unruly, multi-ton machine on a straight course. Every sharp movement of the heavy control surfaces inevitably bleeds away precious, life-saving speed. The weary pilots, despite all their vast experience, can no longer maintain a positive rate of climb. The aircraft, caught in the vice grip of aerodynamics, is simply unable to continue climbing that steep, invisible ladder. The dense oncoming air mercilessly separates from the wide, straight wings, carrying with it the last remnants of hope. In the cold, dimly lit cargo bay, the passengers instinctively press themselves into the hard metal seats, trying to merge with the continuously vibrating fuselage. The vibration abruptly changes its familiar tone, instantly becoming a low, strained, intermittent roar. A high-ranking military commander stares silently out the small, round window into the impenetrable blackness. The people inside feel a terrifying change in their orientation in space. The massive winged machine has finally stopped obeying the iron will of its commander. There is simply not enough kinetic and potential energy to generate even a minimal rate of climb. Forward speed is plummeting, while a safe altitude remains an unattainable dream. It all comes down to simple but incredibly cruel aviation mathematics. To climb with confidence, the huge machine needs a substantial reserve of energy, but the overloaded old bird is spending it all on a desperate fight against the drag of the stopped propeller. For a brief, deceptive moment, it seems to the random observer outside the base perimeter that the pilots are about to perform a miracle. That they will surely pull the failing aircraft up on one engine, since the basic design technically allows for such extreme maneuvers. In theory, a light, empty airframe is capable of flying safely on just one engine, but the colossal real-world weight of the heavy military equipment and the dense cargo packed inside the fuselage erases any illusory hope of a successful outcome. The pilots find themselves in an aerodynamic trap, one with no safe exit outlined in any flight manual. Relentless gravity is now in full control. The steel giant transitions smoothly into a grim, forced descent. The aircraft's nose slowly dips toward the unseen African ground. Every 10 seconds, the transport plane is irrevocably shedding precious meters of altitude. The crew is deliberately trading what's left of their height just to maintain the bare minimum speed needed to stay in control. The machine has to keep pushing forward through this pitch-black darkness to avoid dropping out of the sky like a stone. The lone transport plane glides down an invisible slope, its single roaring propeller slicing through the night air. Suddenly, the concrete jungle becomes a trap for the falling steel giant. The heavy aircraft slides inexorably into the darkness, straight towards the densely populated Karari district. A local resident, stepping out onto the flat roof of his house for a breath of cool night air, freezes in chilling horror. An enormous winged shadow mercilessly blots out the bright stars directly over his head. The aircraft is flying abnormally low, practically shearing off television antennas and barely missing brick superstructures. The distance to the ground is no longer measured in hundreds of meters, but in a paltry few dozen. Journalists would later confidently call these seconds an absolute logical dead end. The experienced pilots had none of the altitude they needed to make a saving turn back to the lit runway of their departure airfield. A ruthless countdown of rapidly vanishing time begins. In the cramped cockpit, the captain is acutely aware of the harsh laws of physics. To bank the plane towards the dead right engine would be to invite instant disaster. Such a careless maneuver would immediately send the heavy, unwieldy machine into an uncontrollable spin. Picture a car racing down the highway when one of its wheels suddenly locks up solid. It would instantly be thrown into a violent spin on the smooth asphalt. Here, in the thin air, such an outcome would be the final act, with zero chance of recovery. On the narrow streets of the sleeping Karari district, eyewitnesses look up in a panic. They can clearly hear an unusual, terrifying, and incredibly strained roar. It's the sound of the single remaining left engine screaming at the very edge of its design limits. The turbine is operating at extreme temperatures, its internal metal glowing white-hot. The engine is desperately trying to pull the multi-ton steel structure from gravity's tenacious grip. This sound is nothing like the familiar, steady hum of passing commercial flights. It's intermittent, unnaturally heavy, like the cough of a giant metal machine losing its final reserves of strength. A stern air accident investigator draws a hard red line on a detailed map. So, why couldn't the trained pilots just bank left, toward the one good engine? The grim answer lies in the catastrophic proximity of the solid ground below. Any significant evasive maneuver requires a bank, and a bank inevitably means losing altitude. But there was no more altitude to lose. Below the riveted fuselage, the lit windows of dense residential blocks were flashing by. Executing a turn at such a laughable height would mean the long wing would simply clip the nearest tall building. The crew was sealed shut in a tight, invisible corridor with no windows and no doors. To their left and right were insurmountable aerodynamic walls. Below them, an endless tangle of city streets. All the aircraft commander could do was clench his teeth and pull back on the control column with all his might. He was trying to prolong this forced straight-line flight for as long as possible. Every microsecond of this desperate struggle demanded superhuman concentration from the exhausted crew. The huge transport plane had effectively become a heavy projectile, slowly sinking over the rooftops. The pilots were physically incapable of changing this grim, approaching reality. The point of no return was long past, and the doomed machine continued its fateful glide through the thick African night. The surrounding area is filled with the monotonous howl of the overloaded engine, a sound that carries for miles. The situation has stabilized into a state of chilling hopelessness, leaving the crew without a single technical option for a maneuver. No one on board can defy the laws of physics that compel tons of metal to be drawn inexorably toward the Earth. Ahead, There is only an endless expanse of city buildings, with the dark silhouette of the tired, winged veteran looming over them. Awakened city dwellers leap from their beds, disturbed by the growing deep rumble. They don't yet grasp the scale of the impending disaster, but they instinctively sense a colossal danger. The very air vibrates with an intense pressure, causing old window panes to rattle. The second hand on the clock makes another cold sweep, bringing the inevitable finale of this short aerial drama ever closer. Until the very last moment, the pilots hope to drag the unresponsive machine over this vast stone labyrinth. But iron inevitably loses to gravity when a living, breathing city pulses beneath its wings. The dense urban landscape rushes rapidly toward the narrow cockpit's windshield. The massive An-26 is sinking, irresistibly, toward the endless concrete maze of the sleeping streets. A local resident who happens to step out onto his open balcony suddenly freezes, paralyzed by a rising terror. The eyewitness can clearly see a gigantic dark steel mass completely eclipsing the starry sky, approaching the residential blocks unstoppably and fast. An invisible timer begins to count down the final moments. Inside the cramped cockpit, the final and most dramatic act of this desperate fight for survival is unfolding. The captain and his trusted co-pilot can physically feel the chilling breath of the imminent crash. Directly on their current course, the massive silhouettes of tightly packed buildings are growing larger. The crew takes decisive action, with every manual control available to them. The tired pilots make the most important, difficult, and truly heroic decision of their lives. With all their remaining strength, they wrench the heavily falling winged machine to the side. There, in the deep darkness of the Sudanese night, they can faintly make out a slightly wider open space. The pilots are consciously trying to steer the multi-ton metal projectile away from the densely populated epicenter. An experienced investigator from the capital would later confidently call this sharp maneuver a noble but utterly fatal sentence for the aircraft itself. The unforgiving laws of aerodynamics have no mercy for such a sharp turn at critically low speeds. The moment the heavy, clumsy aircraft rolls onto its long, straight wing, an irreversible physical event occurs. Any significant bank during such an extreme, forced maneuver completely and irrevocably reduces the vital vertical component of its lift. Imagine a tired tightrope walker who suddenly loses his fragile balance high above a deep, dark abyss. The slightest tilt to one side makes a rapid fall an absolute certainty. The last pathetic crumbs of kinetic energy instantly evaporate into the night air. The multi-ton aircraft loses its final, invisible lifeline in space. It is this desperate and noble turn that forever seals the exact location of the final, devastating impact. The trajectory of the falling steel giant bends sharply in space. The yoke is turned to its absolute limit, but the heavy metal structure simply slides helplessly down an invisible hill. Journalists arriving at the scene of the night's tragedy with the first rays of the morning sun would witness a truly terrifying picture of destruction. The doomed government plane is headed directly for block number 75 of the densely populated Al-Sawra district. This dark square of tight urban development becomes the final destination of a complex route. The needle of the old barometric altimeter makes its last short jump towards the final zero mark. The solid ground rushes up to meet the frozen faces of the crew. The roar of the left engine, straining at its limit, reaches a deafening, ringing crescendo, and then suddenly cuts out. The aircraft, at a colossal forward speed, collides with a massive multi-story residential building. The impact of an incredible, monstrous force instantly shakes the entire sleeping district. Sturdy concrete floors crumble easily under the powerful onslaught of the red-hot fuselage. The immense kinetic energy of the heavy machine, multiplied many times over by the speed of its fall, is released in a single, brilliant flash. Khartoum's emergency services receive the first urgent call. Dispatchers at the communication consoles immediately send dozens of fire crews to the site of the massive crash. The air quickly fills with the acrid smell of burnt aviation fuel. Eyewitnesses from neighboring houses run out in panic onto the dark streets, now shrouded in thick dust. The sound of collapsing structures echoes throughout the night city. The building's reinforced concrete supports cannot withstand a direct hit from a flying object of such enormous mass. The transport plane literally punches through the upper floors, leaving a gaping void in its wake. Mangled fragments of the wings and tail are scattered far and wide, showering the cars parked below. For the local residents, time seems to freeze in that terrible second, forever dividing their normal lives into a before and an after. A fireball rips the night into 1,000 dazzling, burning fragments. Heavy metal slams into concrete, unleashing the colossal kinetic energy built up during the fall. The impact of the huge aircraft predictably causes a monstrous explosion. For a split second, a massive flash transforms the dark Al-Sawra district into the brightly lit stage of some surreal theater. A local resident, just moments ago resting peacefully in a nearby house, is violently jolted to his feet by a deafening, rolling boom. The shockwave effortlessly blows out sturdy window frames, knocking the few unlucky pedestrians on the narrow streets right off their feet. Where multi-story buildings stood tall just a moment before, a solid wall of roaring flame now erupts. A local news reporter would later write in his detailed report, "It was like a volcano suddenly erupting in the very heart of a densely populated city. Tons of jet fuel, still in the transport plane's tanks, detonate on impact. They turn the collapsed ruins into a gigantic white-hot furnace. The temperature at the epicenter instantly skyrockets to unimaginable levels, melting what's left of the aluminum fuselage and the solid steel rebar of the buildings. The fire greedily devours everything in its path, creating an impassable barrier of searingly hot air. In its final seconds, the falling plane, like some giant clumsy beast, drags the city's critical infrastructure down with it. The wide metal planes of its wings snag the high-voltage power lines, tearing them down with incredible ease. Thick sparking cables fall onto the cracked asphalt with a sinister, snake-like hiss, throwing off showers of bright blue sparks. In that same instant, the epicenter of the disaster and all the surrounding residential blocks are plunged into absolute, impenetrable darkness. Now, the only grim landmark for the completely disoriented citizens trying to grasp the scale of the tragedy is the ominous orange glow of the massive fire. The next day, an experienced investigator, carefully studying detailed diagrams of the damaged power grid, understands the full gravity of the situation. He makes notes with a red marker on a large paper map, marking the radius of the complete blackout. This sudden, total loss of power presents an incredibly severe challenge for the massive nighttime rescue operation now unfolding. Without the familiar bright streetlights, heavy specialized machinery is forced to navigate through dangerous piles of concrete almost blind, losing critical minutes that could save lives. Meanwhile, a thick, utterly impenetrable cloud rapidly rises over the destroyed block number 75. Black, acrid smoke from burning plastic, damaged wiring, and spilled jet fuel mixes with the dense construction dust from the collapsed concrete slabs. This suffocating gray-black shroud quickly blankets the entire huge residential area, making it difficult to breathe and blinding the shocked people on the ground. A random witness on a neighboring street frantically covers his face with a piece of wet cloth, desperately trying to make out any familiar shapes through the toxic fog. Fine cement dust grinds horribly between the teeth, settling in an incredibly thick layer on abandoned parked cars and the leaves of the few surviving trees. The true, terrifying scale of the destruction on the ground is not immediately clear to the arriving rescue services. Severed, thick cables hang helplessly from leaning concrete poles, posing a hidden threat to any rescuer passing by. The unbearable heat from the towering column of flame physically prevents the first fire crews from getting close to the white-hot epicenter. Numerous emergency response vehicles are already racing through the completely dark city streets, navigating solely by that frightening tall pillar of fire. The metropolis is facing a logistical nightmare on this endless night, trying to rapidly assess the direct consequences of a massive aircraft colliding with civilian buildings. The Al-Sawra district descends into a deep, forced chaos, where the only light in the thick, pitch-black darkness is the monotonous flashing of red and blue emergency lights from the arriving rescuers and ambulances. The chaos of the first few minutes gives way to a desperate, coordinated fight for every single life. The dense darkness is illuminated only by the menacing flashes of the merciless flames, as ordinary caring citizens arrive in droves to help the professional services. Volunteers begin to furiously clear the smoldering, searing hot rubble with their bare hands. They don't wait for the official arrival of heavy construction equipment, because the clock is now ticking down in precious, fleeting moments. An exhausted local man, choking on the acrid, toxic smoke, desperately pulls at an impossibly heavy piece of hot metal, trying to free his trapped neighbors. The first of the seriously injured are carefully pulled from beneath the burning, massive wreckage. The surrounding air is thick with the suffocating smell of burning, melted wiring, and incandescent crumbled concrete. Every life saved in this fiery chaos is seen by those around as a true, unbelievable miracle. Dozens of civilians suffer severe thermal injuries on that fateful night. Suddenly, the sirens of dozens of arriving ambulances begin to wail. The emergency drivers struggle to make their way through the dense, panicked crowd of shocked onlookers. The medical vehicles, in a continuous, endless stream, transport the seriously wounded to the nearest overcrowded municipal hospital, Al-Sawra. An experienced surgeon on duty in the brightly lit emergency room assesses the true scale of the unfolding tragedy with deep horror. Doctors are literally run off their feet, trying to provide emergency care as quickly as possible to an endless stream of moaning patients with incredibly severe burns. There aren't nearly enough painkillers to go around, but the clinic's medical staff performs the impossible, pulling victims back from the very edge of a dark abyss. However, such miracles aren't happening everywhere during this terrible shift. The head of the expert team, arriving at the epicenter closer to morning, dryly and dispassionately records the frightening reality. The durable aviation-grade metal of the fuselage has been melted almost beyond recognition by the raging fire. There was simply no objective chance of survival inside that sealed steel trap. All 17 people on board the downed government flight, including a high-ranking general and the highly experienced flight crew, died instantly at the moment of the horrific impact. Their shared tragic fate was sealed in that fateful second when the heavy-winged machine helplessly banked onto its left wing, directly over the dense residential blocks. Well-known city journalists rushed to prepare their morning breaking news reports, meticulously piecing together scattered official data into a single, soul-chilling picture. 29 ordinary civilians are found to have met their end under the completely collapsed concrete floors of the destroyed multi-story building. Regular city dwellers, simply resting quietly in their own comfortable apartments, became the random victims of this massive logistical disaster. Witnesses of the nightmare tell reporters with TV cameras, their voices filled with unconcealed bitterness, how huge chunks of twisted reinforced concrete wiped their familiar world off the face of the earth in a single instant. The faint hope of finding anyone unharmed at the very epicenter of the monstrous impact fades rapidly with each new, agonizing hour spent carefully clearing the smoldering debris. State news agencies finally publish the dry, merciless casualty figures. The final death toll from this horrifying air disaster reaches 46 people. The massive tragedy in the Al-Sawra district forever inscribes this dark date into the modern history of the Sudanese capital. The crash of the worn-out transport plane demonstrates, graphically and cruelly, the extremely high price of being forced to use old equipment in the midst of a prolonged crisis. Rescue and recovery operations at the cordoned-off crash site continue uninterrupted for several more long, tense days. Heavy cranes methodically lift massive concrete blocks until every last missing resident is found by the utterly exhausted rescue workers. The vast metropolis gradually sinks into a deep, silent mourning, trying to come to terms with the true scale of these irreplaceable civilian losses. In the first anxious hours after the nighttime tragedy, global news aggregators rush to report a major sensation. The burning wreckage in the streets has not even had time to cool, yet the screaming headlines confidently declare a targeted missile strike. Journalists compete to construct a perfectly coherent, easily understandable, and very appealing theory for the mass audience. The government transport plane was supposedly hit by a modern portable anti-aircraft system right after takeoff. Such a version seems logical for an active armed conflict zone. The bright flash from the right engine, clearly seen by terrified people on the ground, fits perfectly with the cinematic image of a direct hit from a heat-seeking missile. However, the physical reality turns out to be more mundane and far more terrifying than any media fantasy. A representative from the Technical Bureau, interviewing shocked eyewitnesses right at the crash site, finds critical inconsistencies. Witnesses from the residential areas state with absolute certainty there was no fiery trail from the ground into the night sky. No one nearby heard the characteristic loud pops of an anti-aircraft missile launch. The only sound cutting through the air was the constant agonizing howl of a dying old turboprop engine. Military sources at the General Staff moved swiftly and decisively to dismiss the popular media theory of a deliberate shootdown. The modern air defense radars on duty at the time showed completely clear skies. The Sudanese army quickly issues a remarkably brief official press release. The High Command officially classifies the catastrophic crash as nothing more than an internal technical failure. That single stark sentence instantly brings all public discussion of the true causes to a dead halt. The agency openly admits the loss of the heavy aircraft was due to equipment failure, chalking the tragedy up to the harsh, unavoidable costs of an ongoing logistics crisis. But behind that official statement, a vast, impenetrable wall of silence quickly rises. From that moment on, the state's powerful machinery of secrecy kicks into high gear. Independent investigators immediately hit an insurmountable wall of bureaucracy. The authorities flat out refused to release the original military registration number of the downed aircraft. The aging aircraft's original factory serial number is also meticulously scrubbed from all public records. Without these two key identifiers, it becomes physically impossible to trace the plane's service history, check its maintenance records, or even confirm the true age of the aircraft. Overnight, the winged steel veteran becomes a nameless metallic ghost, vanishing from all global aviation registries forever, without a trace. At the crash site, cordoned off by soldiers, amidst the molten and twisted aluminum, the exhausted search team finds them. The soot-stained, shock-resistant cylinders, the old flight data and cockpit voice recorders. Miraculously, they survive the inferno at the heart of the crash. These instruments hold all the hidden answers. The graphs showing pressure drops in the fuel lines, the crew's last desperate words, every sharp movement of the control yoke. But the decrypted data is never released to the public. The charred magnetic tapes are immediately confiscated by Army security specialists, and they disappear deep into the steel safes of classified government archives. A special commission of experts conducts its analysis entirely behind heavy, closed doors. The engineers meticulously study every charred component, every surviving second of the cold, hard flight telemetry. They pinpoint the exact physical reason the turbine failed at the most critical moment. They uncover the entire, deep-seated chain of systemic failures stemming from a depleted and underfunded maintenance system. And yet, their final conclusions will forever remain hidden from a concerned public. No detailed public reports are ever issued. No mandatory technical bulletins to prevent similar fatal incidents in the future. Nothing. The sky keeps its dark secrets, leaving the public with nothing more than a short, dry notice in the morning paper. And with that, the official investigation is quietly closed.